I'll talk about the evolution of cooperation and religion, or religion and cooperation, or perhaps their co-evolution, and more specifically the idea that religion allowed human type large-scale cooperation. So religion was the factor that allowed the evolution of cooperation. That's the idea we'll discuss, but to provide some context to that, we'll talk about some alternative ideas first. This is the outline. We'll start with the basic concept of religion. Evolution has several products. The two most important ones are the adaptations and byproducts. What are they? Can religion be a byproduct? Well, it can. But we'll mostly focus on the idea that religion is an adaptation. If it is an adaptation, for what? It could be cooperation. But first, we'll briefly look at the idea that religion might be an adaptation for reproduction or fertility instead. Then we'll look at the idea, that's the basic idea in this talk, that religion evolved to enable cooperation. Which aspect of religion? Perhaps religious belief, or perhaps religious rituals, or perhaps in tandem. And then the conclusion is that there is no conclusion, just remaining questions. So we'll look at some remaining lingering questions. I asked a couple of questions. We may add more. But the basic idea that we don't know why religion evolved, and we don't know whether it played a crucial role in the evolution of cooperation. We think it does, but we are not really sure. Okay, so the basic question we'll be trying to answer, and that we won't be able to answer, is that whether religious thought and behavior, so when we say religion, what we mean is the psychological dimension of religion, religious thought and religious behavior, rather than religion as an institution. So is religious thought and behavior an evolutionary adaptation selected to enable large-scale cooperation? This is the question we'll be trying to answer. Okay, what is religion? Religion has been defined since the beginning of the evolutionary anthropology of religion in the 19th century as some sort of belief in spiritual beings by Edward Tyler, for example, the British anthropologist, sometimes called the father of anthropology, certainly the father of evolutionary and father of anthropology of religion. More recently, I think he's a psychologist Saroglu, defined religion in terms of 4 dimensions. The dimensions are believing, bonding, behaving, and belonging. Believing obviously refers to the cognitive dimension of religion. Bonding is more emotional, and usually rituals are involved. Through collective rituals, people become emotional and they bond to each other. The behavioral aspect of religion, which is mostly moral behavior, not all, but most religions advocate moral, upright behavior. And finally, religion is rarely an individual event. Instead, religion binds a group of people into coherent communities. Religions enhance social harmony, etc. So that's the social aspect of religion, community building aspect of religion. Okay, but even if there are 4 dimensions and perhaps more, the basic idea underlying religion is a belief in supernatural agents. Supernatural in the sense that the entities, some entities belong to a realm that is different from our realm, the natural one. And secondly, these supernatural entities are not just abstract philosophical ideas, abstract principles, but rather they are agents. That is, they have intentions, they have purposes, and they have the power to act upon the world to realize those intentions. That's what we mean by an agent. So belief in supernatural agents, rituals organized around supernatural agents, behaving in a manner that is consistent with the wishes of the supernatural agents, and forming a community around the concept of supernatural agents is central to most religions. Okay, what about evolution? Here we talk about the 2 products of evolution. In fact, evolution has probably 3 products. The third one is just noise or random effect. But religions are so complex that it is very unlikely that religion is a random effect of something else. Rather, the discussion in the literature revolves around the question of whether religion, as a product of evolution, is an adaptation or a byproduct. So here are simple, straightforward definition of what an adaptation is and what a byproduct is. Adaptations are traits. Traits are biological traits. They might be anatomical structures, they might be physiological processes, they might be behavioral tendencies. They are traits produced by natural selection because they increased inclusive fitness in an ancestral environment. Increasing in, inclusive fitness is what we call being adaptive. So religion might be an adaptation because it increased reproductive success or inclusive fitness. Inclusive fitness refers to William Hamilton's idea that it's not just individual fitness but rather inclusive fitness that is being selected by natural selection. Not necessarily today, but it was adaptive in an ancestral environment, and that's why it has been selected as an adaptation. So that's one view. The alternative view is that religion is a byproduct. What is a byproduct? They are traits, byproducts are traits that go along with other adaptations but are not adaptive themselves. They are not adaptive today, and they were not adaptive in the ancestral environment. The classic non-psychological example for adaptations and byproducts, usually found in David Buss's books, is that, for example, the umbilical cord is an adaptation. The umbilical cord is the anatomical structure that enables the transfer of nutrients from the mother to the embryo. It is clearly adaptive. It increases the reproductive success, the survival chances of the embryo. Whereas, what's it called? The belly button or the navel is just a byproduct. All humans have belly buttons, but belly buttons are not adaptive. They're not for anything. Rather, they are just the byproduct of a severed umbilical cord. So the basic question is then whether religion is more like an umbilical cord or more like the belly button. So we'll first look at the byproduct account briefly, because that's not our real focus in this talk. The byproduct theorists claim that the psychological mechanisms that produce religious beliefs and behaviors were not designed to produce religion. Therefore, religion is a byproduct. In fact, this is just a definition of a byproduct. So when you claim that something is a byproduct, you need to specify the adaptation that goes together with the byproduct. The byproduct of which adaptation? There are several accounts by the byproduct theorists. Pascal Boyer, for example, in a relatively early article, claimed that religion is the byproduct of several thinking dispositions, and these dispositions themselves are supposed to be adaptations. What are they? Some of them: dualism, theory of mind, teleological thinking, hypersensitive agency detection, etc. Dualism is the idea that body and soul, or body and mind, body and spirit are separate or separable entities, and this is a natural, believing in dualism is a natural, intuitive thinking disposition for humans. This has been emphasized since the beginning of the study of religion by, again, Edward Tyler, for example. So, for example, when we are dreaming, our bodies are here, but our minds and souls are wandering around in the world. So, body and soul become separated during dreams. And similarly, when a person dies, again, the natural thing to think about, to think is that the dead person's body is here, but his soul is somewhere else. So body and soul can become separated. They are two separate entities. And this naturally leads to the idea, to the possibility that if body and soul are separable entities, then souls without any bodies, disembodied spirits are possible. And obviously, this might be the beginning of religion. In fact, animism, as proposed by Durkheim, is one of the most primordial or primitive religions. Animism is the idea that there are spirits around. Spirits are embodied beings. So dualism, as a thinking disposition, can naturally lead to the idea that spirits, supernatural beings, exist. Similarly, theory of mind, our tendency to attribute mental states to other beings. If other beings can have mental states, intentions, etc., and spirits can also have intentions, benevolent or malevolent intentions. Again, theory of mind is supposed to be an adaptation. It allows us to predict the behavior of other agents, including humans. But when applied to spirits, theory of mind leads to the idea that these spirits might have benevolent or malevolent intentions for us. Teleological thinking is attributing purpose to everything in nature. Nature is purposeful. So this is also intimately connected to hypersensitive agency detection. When something unexpected happens, we tend to attribute it to the intentions of unseen agents rather than just mechanical failure. This can be adaptive. Think of the so-called type 1 error or type 2 error, false positive versus false negative. If there is a predator lurking around and you don't believe there is, then you might be meal to the predator, whereas if it's just the wind, but you think it's a predator, you lose nothing. So one kind of error is more costly than the other kind of error. So even if your agency detector is hypersensitive, going off too easily, it might still be adaptive. So if no natural agent is detectable as the cause of the unexpected event, perhaps supernatural agents are the cause. So these thinking dispositions might, under some certain circumstances, social structures, etc., can lead to religious beliefs. But religious beliefs are not adaptations themselves. They are the byproducts of more fundamental thinking dispositions. And when these dispositions are weak, irreligion ensues. For example, in autistic people, theory of mind, teleological thinking, etc., might be weak. They might be unwilling to attribute to agents, to purposive beings, what they see around. So, and there's at least some evidence suggesting that autistic people or people in the autistic spectrum might be less religious than average people. So that's one byproduct account of religion. Religion is not an adaptation itself, but it's the byproduct of other adaptations. And this was actually the dominant position in cognitive science, in the cognitive science of religion, in the 1990s and in the beginning of the 21st century. But gradually there has been a shift from the byproduct thinking to adaptationist thinking. One article that I think has been especially influential that convinced the byproduct theorists that the adaptationist account might be interesting, might be fruitful, might deserve to be taken seriously is one by an adaptationist theorist, the evolutionary anthropologist Richard Sosis, in a theoretical article in Journal of Cognition and Culture. He evaluated several claims, in fact 5 claims against the adaptationist account, and he tried to refute them. We don't have time to go all over these. So for example, 5, religion is too costly. How can it be adaptive? How can it be an adaptation? So In a moment, we'll see one account that tries to explain how religion can be an adaptation, even if it is so costly. Okay, so if it is an adaptation, if religion is an adaptation, if it has been selected by natural selection because it is conducive to increasing reproductive success, inclusive fitness, what is it an adaptation for? The basic idea will be cooperation. But first, let's look at an alternative idea, briefly, that religion has been selected because of its direct reproductive advantage. Religion increases fertility. That's why it has been selected. This is not as crazy as it first sounds, because there is some evidence that historical evidence from the history of religions that religions have been a pro-natalist force throughout history. Pro-natalist means religions encourage fertility. It fosters fertility. Remember the biblical injunction, be fruitful and multiply. There are several other commandments in other religions that people should be fruitful. They should have children. More specifically, religions usually advocate a slow life history, what we might call slow life history. Okay, so that's historical evidence. And today, religious people still have more children. That's another indication that religions might be still fostering fertility. Other types of evidence. Religious people are usually seen as more trustable than non-religious people, even by non-religious people themselves. And one reason, perhaps not the only reason, but one reason religious people are trusted more is that they are viewed as slow life history strategists. Slow life history is the name given to the general behavior pattern where a person doesn't pursue a short-term sexual strategy, gets married, and lives a strictly monogamous life, and invests in his or her children rather than investing in further reproduction attempts. So, religious people are trusted not because they believe in moralizing gods, but because they are seen as slow life history strategists. And one particularly persuasive piece of evidence for the above claim is that, well, if religious people are trusted more, non-religious people are trusted less. Distrust of non-religious individuals is almost completely erased when people are told that this particular non-religious person is following a restricted monogamous lifestyle. So when a non-religious person is described as a slow life history strategist, distrust is suddenly diminished. Another indication that what makes non-religious people untrustable is not that they don't behave in moralizing gods, but the perception that this person might be leading a fast life history. One more piece of information, 11 years old, from the journal Evolution and Human Behavior. They used the World Values Survey, and the explicit goal was to compare the religion promotes cooperation versus religion promotes fertility view, and they found that there is more evidence for the second. Religiosity is more strongly related to reproductive morals than to cooperative morals, particularly in developed countries. So, although not the focus of this talk, there is at least some evidence that suggests that this idea, this view, should be taken seriously, that religion evolved not primarily because it promoted cooperation, but because it promoted fertility. Okay, but we'll focus on the cooperation theories of religion. There is a problem of there is a problem of cooperation, and the claim is that religion solves this particular problem. So what is the problem, and how does religion solve the problem? The problem of free riding. Cooperation is good. Cooperation, usually, if everyone cooperates, usually their inclusive fitness is increased. So in that sense, cooperation is adaptive. But if the group of people cooperating, if the size of the group increases, then it becomes more and more difficult to monitor whether each person is really contributing to the cooperative effort. So this is called the free riding problem. When the group becomes larger and larger, the best strategy, the best evolutionary strategy, becomes not contributing anything to the cooperative effort, but benefiting from the general cooperation. This is called free riding. So the free riding problem becomes especially acute when group size increases. So this is the problem of of maintaining cooperation in large groups. And the standard evolutionary mechanisms through which cooperation is believed to have evolved are supposedly unable to solve this problem. What are they? Kin selection, direct reciprocity, indirect reciprocity. Kin selection cannot solve this problem because large-scale problem is generally among people who are genetically unrelated, and kin selection only applies to genetically related people. Direct reciprocity is no solution either, because in many social interactions are one-shot interactions. We encounter the person only once, and therefore there is no possibility of reciprocation, whereas direct reciprocity is entirely based on the idea of reciprocation. So if there is no possibility of reciprocation, then direct reciprocity as an evolutionary mechanism cannot work. Indirect reciprocity is built on the idea of reputation. And in large groups, in modern life, for example, there are many anonymous interactions. We don't know who we are dealing with. Still, we are cooperative. Since the interactions are anonymous, there is no possibility of building a positive reputation by behaving pro-socially. Therefore, indirect reciprocity is also claimed to be unable to explain how cooperation can be built and maintained in large groups. So the alternative proposed by the adaptationist theorists of religion is that religion can solve the problem of free riding in large groups. Religion as a supernatural community building, monitoring, and punishment mechanism. Religion organized around the idea of supernatural agents can build communities. Through religion, we can virtually monitor free riders, and we can punish them. Okay, which aspect, which dimension of religion is especially involved in this function? We'll look at, remember, Saroglu's dimensions, belief and behavior. We'll first look at behavioral aspect, the so-called rituals, and then we'll look at religious beliefs. Costly rituals are one supposed solution to one account of how religion can solve the problem of large-scale cooperation. Costly rituals are those rituals that are hard to fake by non-cooperators. It's relatively cheap to dance with the others, but it is not cheap to get circumcised, or to fast for 30 days, or to handle poisonous snakes. So these costly rituals, these are the rituals that are called costly, and when you're engaged with them, you are, in a sense, signaling that you are really part of the group, that you really belong to the group. One advocate of this position is, again, the American anthropologist Roy Rappaport, in his book Ritual and Religion in the Making of Humanity, which was published 2 years after he died. He is actually echoing and elaborating on a previous idea by Durkheim, ritual participation signals commitment to a set of social norms and conventions, and the norms are expressed through the ritual's content and context. As I said, a very similar idea was expressed about 100 years ago by the French anthropologist or sociologist Émile Durkheim. So it is ritual that builds the community, that builds the cooperative community. Okay, what is the evidence? Again, the evidence has to be indirect. Rituals signal loyalty to the group and commitment to its belief. As a result, the individuals in the group trust each other. In-group trust is high. So how is trust related to cooperation? Well, it's easy how the two are related. Trust enables cooperation among people who do not know each other personally. So the free riding problem is, in a sense, minimized if there is already very high trust. If you trust the other person, if you trust that he will not betray you, that he will contribute to the cooperative effort, then the constant need of monitoring the other person is diminished. As a result, need for costly monitoring mechanisms to prevent free riding is reduced. So that's the supposed mechanism of how rituals can be conducive to large-scale cooperation. And high-cost rituals, costly rituals, high-cost rituals are especially effective because high cost increases the reliability of commitment. They are hard to make. And this can explain, as we mentioned when we talked about Sauss's idea, this can explain how costly behavior can be adaptive. Rituals are adaptive exactly because they are costly. Less costly rituals would not be adaptive because they would not be hard to fake, and as a result, those who engage in less costly behaviors would not be as trustable. Okay, more recent evidence. One by, I don't know how this is pronounced, but I call it Zigalatas and the others. They played a random allocation game, a type of economic game, in Mauritius, an island in the Indian Ocean. The game measures prosociality or fairness, fair play, and the frequency of the participants' ritual participation was positively correlated with the amount of fair play. So fair play was predicted not by the beliefs of the participant, but his religious, by his frequency of religious participation. Other evidence suggests that costly rituals are also correlated with the longevity of communes. A commune, a group of people organized around an ideal, last longer if the commune frequently engages in costly ritual. So that's at the level of the commune. People who frequently engage in costly rituals have higher prosocial reputations, and having a good reputation is important. And similarly, frequently engaging in costly rituals also contributes to the social network size of the person. So this is empirical evidence that participating in rituals is good for the individual and good for the community itself. What are the proximate mechanisms? What might be the proximate mechanisms? Well, during a ritual, usually people act in rhythm and synchrony with each other, and this usually leads to what is called collective euphoria. And again, this can remind you of the term collective effervescence mentioned by, again, Durkheim. Collective euphoria, collective effervescence are collective positive feelings during a ritual that binds the community together. So this is supposed to be the proximate mechanism on the basis of which rituals ultimately lead to cooperation. Okay, one question, rituals, so let's say that we are convinced that rituals, especially costly rituals, are conducive to cooperation, but do they have to be religious rituals? Why not secular rituals? Because there are non-religious rituals as well. One study by, again, Sosis, more than 20 years ago, historical research, showed that he compared several 19th century religious communes and non-religious communes, some in Israel, some in Canada, I think, and he demonstrated on the basis of historical data that religious communes were more likely to survive than non-religious, secular, socialist communes. It's not clear why, but one suggestion is that somehow religious communes engage in religious rituals, and somehow religious rituals are more effective than non-religious rituals in fostering harmony, collective euphoria, and the longevity of the commune. We don't exactly know why, but it appears that religious rituals are indeed more effective than non-religious rituals. Okay. It's also possible that instead of rituals, religious rituals, what contributes to large-scale cooperation is the cognitive aspect of religion. Rather than rituals, rather than behavior, the belief, religious beliefs, and especially beliefs in moralizing gods, beliefs in moralizing high gods. Supernatural agents who are watchful, powerful, moralistic, and punitive. Watchfulness in the extreme refers to what we call omniscience. Powerful in the extreme refers to what we call omnipotence. Moralistic, in monotheistic religions, God is described as omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, perfectly moral, and obviously punitive. Okay, so the idea is, again, that non-cooperators and norm violators need to be monitored and deterred to maintain cooperation and social harmony. That's the basic problem of large-scale cooperation. And this becomes difficult as group size increases. Belief in moralistic gods is or might be one way to ensure it. And the most sophisticated, elaborate defense of this position is probably the 15-author article in the journal Behavioral and Brain Sciences in 2016. Aaron Oranzayan is included among the authors, Joseph Henrich and several others. This is sometimes colloquially called the supernatural punishment hypothesis of the cultural evolution of pro-social religions. It's a very elaborate defense of the idea that even if no one is watching you, the supernatural agents exist. They watch you, they are powerful enough, they are concerned about your moral aspects of your behavior, and they are capable and willing to punish you if you are not in line with what is expected from you. So that's called the supernatural punishment hypothesis of the cultural evolution of pro-social religions. They're also advocating a cultural group selection view, which is, I'm sure you know that it is a bit controversial. And they also propose a two-way causation. So it's not just that religion leads to cooperation, but cooperation, enlarged cooperation, might lead to the further spread of the same religion. Religion leads to enlarged cooperation networks, and networks spread religion through cultural group selection. Okay, evidence. That's the theoretical position. Again, in the same article, they propose several lines of evidence. We don't have time to go over all lines of evidence, but let's look at the basic ones. Religious priming experiments, these have been conducted since 2007, I think. There has been some failures of replication, but in a relatively recent meta-analysis by Sherif et al. In Personality and Social Psychology Review, religious priming experiments were on the whole were demonstrated to really increase prosocial behavior. Prosocial behavior is mostly investigated in economic games, resource allocation in economic games. So that's how prosociality is measured. So when you remind people of their religion, religious concepts, etc., usually prosocial behavior increases. In the same article, Sherif et al. Report that non-religious participants are not really influenced by religious primes. Okay, what else? Correlational country-level evidence, correlation between heaven and hell beliefs and national crime rate, especially belief in hell. The prevalence of belief in hell is negatively correlated with national crime rate. So it appears that if you believe in hell, you are discouraged from committing crimes. More recent evidence paints a more mixed picture. There is evidence supportive and also evidence not entirely consistent with the supernatural punishment hypothesis. Two examples. One from, I think, a Chinese group of researchers from Royal Society of Open Science. They played a donation game, a kind of economic game measuring prosociality from 17 communities, and they found, again, they correlated prosocial behavior in the game with several demographic characteristics of the participants, and they found no relation between belief in supernatural punishment and prosociality. So the basic claim of the hypothesis was not found. What predicted prosociality in these economic games was the reputational concerns and the religious practices of the participants. So a slightly different hypothesis was supported. The same year, in Proceedings of the Royal Society B, another cross-cultural investigation with 15 populations used the random allocation game and the dictator game, again, similar games where your prosociality, your willingness to help others is measured. And in these games, you allocated money between you and a distant co-religionist and a local co-religionist and a distant co-religionist. So the amount of money you allocate to the distant co-religionist is proposed as the operational definition of your prosociality. Instead of helping yourself or your close friends, if you are helping, or to the degree to which you are willing to help a distant co-religionist is supposed to be an indication of your prosociality. So prosociality, or lack of local favoritism, was predicted by God's knowledge. God's knowledge means it was another continuous variable. How knowledgeable is the God you believe in? It might be omniscient or it might be less than omniscient. So if God knows everything or many things, then this was positively correlated with lack of local favoritism and the punitiveness of the God, but not God's moral interest. Whether God was interested in the moral behavior of humans or not was not directly correlated with prosociality. Again, not entirely consistent with the supernatural punishment hypothesis, but not directly contradictory either. Two more. How much time do I have? It's already over.
No, you can continue. 10 minutes in total, including questions. But we can extend a little.
Okay, so I'll go faster. A more recent study We usually talk about high gods. A high god is a god who created the universe, who knows everything, who is capable of doing everything, etc. So what about small gods who don't know everything, who can't do everything? Do small gods also contribute to large-scale cooperation in small communities? Well, one study from Evolution and Human Behavior by Singh, Joseph Henrich is also included among the authors. They investigated belief in the water spirit Sikamainen in Indonesia, in one of the Indonesian islands. So this is a local water spirit. It is not a high god, it's not even a god, but it is a malevolent spirit, and I'm not sure about the gender of the spirit, but I'll call it he is believed to attack people who do not share meat. So apparently this small local spirit is concerned about one aspect of moral behavior. If you do not share your meat with your neighbors, then you'll be attacked by the spirit. And people usually think that when something bad befalls them, they have really been attacked by the spirit. But this spirit, I call it there, it doesn't care about other moral transgressions. If you steal from your friends, if you lie to your friends, this local spirit is not concerned. He or it is only concerned about meat sharing. So this is a more restricted supernatural agent. It's supernatural, it's an agent, it is moralistic, but it's not a high god, and it is not concerned with every aspect of morality. Okay, so a general summary, and then we'll look at the final problematic evidence. God's concerns, both big gods and small gods, are about cooperative dilemmas. Whatever the cooperative dilemma is within an ecological context, the local god is usually directly concerned of that dilemma. Moralizing high gods are associated with large societies, but gods that punish immoral behavior, small gods, exist in all societies. So the basic idea is that the god doesn't have to be a high god in order to build and sustain communal life. Gods evolve to care about what their cultural community needs to sustain stability and harmony. If there's a water scarcity problem, then the god, the local god, will be directly involved, directly concerned with how each person is using water. This is from Rossano. Okay. One final study, and then we'll ask the questions. Which came first, moralizing religions or large-scale cooperation? It appears that they are correlated. There is some sort of correlation in current societies. And in history, moralizing religions and large-scale cooperation tend to go together. But which came first? In other words, which is the cause and which is the effect? And although the supernatural punishment hypothesis envisions a two-way interaction, a two-way causation, basically it is the moralizing religions that enabled and led to large-scale cooperation and social complexity. Is this true? Well, Turchin et al. Think that this is not true. This was published last year in Religion, Brain and Behavior. This article has an interesting history. It was first published in Nature, the general science journal, but then Joseph Henrich and his team detected several coding errors and statistical errors, and because of those errors, the study was retracted from Nature. And several years later, it was published with better analyses in Religion, Brain and Behavior. So again, it's a large team of authors, and they used what they call SESHAT. It's a large history database, especially a database that contains information about the religious practices and religious beliefs of historical communities, a very large data bank. And on the basis of the information in that data bank, they tried to build a model of what presumably caused, what what presumably came before and what came after. And their conclusion is that intergroup warfare, in other words, intergroup competition, supported by resource availability, played a major causal role in the evolution of both social complexity, that is large-scale cooperation, and moralizing religions. So moralizing religions is not the cause of social complexity, large-scale cooperation, but rather both are caused by something more fundamental. And this is the model they propose. So military competition is the real causal factor. If you are under constant threat of being annihilated by your malevolent neighbors, if there is military competition, then that starts the whole process. This leads to socio-political complexity, which is enabled by large-scale cooperation. Independently, military competition also leads to the generation of the idea of moralizing supernatural punishment and reward. So moralizing supernatural punishment has no direct causal influence on socio-political complexity, large-scale cooperation. Moralizing high gods are enabled by primarily military competition and agricultural productivity, and less so by pastoralism. So although they usually go together in history, there is no direct causal relation between supernatural punishment, high moralizing gods, and a large-scale cooperation. This is the conclusion reached by Turchin and his team. And I haven't seen any, what's it called, any rebuttal to this claim yet. But I'm sure at least one is in order. Okay, so that's all the studies I had in mind to describe. There are remaining questions. Religion leads to prosociality, cooperation, altruism, but how universal it is? Well, Galen, I think he's a social psychologist, argued in a Psychological Bulletin paper that religious cooperation is usually parochial. Religious people are cooperative, altruistic, prosocial, as long as the people they are interacting with are co-religionists. Once it becomes clear that the other people are not co-religionists, religious people are no longer altruistic, or they are not more altruistic than non-religious people. So religious cooperation, Galen argues that religious cooperation is not universal. Religious cooperation is rather parochial. Okay, how is this relevant? Well, think of the practical implications of all this work. I'm usually not directly interested in practical implications. I'm not a practical person. But some people might want to derive practical implications from all this research. Religion leads to cooperation, so perhaps we might encourage people to become more religious so that they will be, or the whole community will be more cooperative. But if Galen is right, then promoting religion, promoting religiosity might not be such a good idea for a multi-religious community. Another question, many more, but one final question, which I have been unable to find an answer in the literature is, how is belief in supernatural maintained in the face of cases of non-punishment? People are afraid that gods will punish them when they transgress. But many religious people do transgress. And sooner or later, they should find out that they are not punished. So this should lead to diminished belief in the punitive nature of God. But apparently, it doesn't. Why? How? I don't know. Some references, some basic references, not primary literature. The recent Oxford Handbook of Evolutionary Psychology of Religion is especially good if you are interested in Evolutionary Psychology of Religion. The Big Gods book by Nolan Zion is a classic. It is the classic exposition of the supernatural punishment hypothesis. The sources article was the one, well, I used to be a byproduct theorist, and now I'm closer to being an adaptationist. And one of the articles that convinced me or tilted me towards the adaptationist view was the article by Sosis. He identifies 5 misunderstandings of the adaptationist program and tries to correct them, so you might want to check it. And finally, the primary proponent of the idea that it is not the belief aspect of religion, but it is the ritual aspect of religion that contributes to cooperation, large-scale cooperation, cohesion, etc., is Harvey Whitehouse, and he has a recent book from Oxford University Press, The Ritual Animal, Imitation and Cohesion in the Evolution of Social Complexity. Usually, psychologists are more interested in the belief aspect of religion, whereas anthropologists are more interested in the ritual aspect. And since I presume we are mostly psychologists, we might be less informed about religious rituals, so I can recommend that book as a corrective for psychologists. So, thank you.
Question?
Yes.
I'm also an anthropologist, so I'm interested in these topics as well. So I would also like to add the environment and the context into analysis of belief systems, because belief systems are also constructed as a response to the environmental threats and problems. For example, eating pigs in Islam is haram because in the Middle East it is not ecologically valid to or it is good for the health of the people to eat pigs. On the other hand, when we are looking at India, eating cows are sacred because using cows in agriculture is more beneficial in the long run than eating them, because if you eat them, you are going to perish in the long run, and there are a lot of people with limited amount of cows in the area. So I am more inclined to follow through Marvin Harris's approach in pigs, cows.
Marvin Harris?
Marvin Harris, yes.
I haven't heard of him.
An anthropologist who is
Harris. Marvin Harris. No, I don't know him.
Yeah, he's interested in anthropology of religions. So I would also like to ask whether it is preferable to have large-scale cooperation in all times and contexts, because there could be a time in the future where small-scale cooperation is more beneficial in surviving. For example, when we live on an island, we might have beliefs that are more suitable for small-scale corporations. So, lastly, I would also like to maybe perhaps consider the belief systems that are not religious. For example, belief in astrology, because religion is on decline in modern societies, but there are other belief systems that are coming in. People say I don't believe in anything, but they partake in rituals that are religious. So I think this could be good to research in further studies.
Right. Okay. Just 2 comments. I agree with you. I mentioned an article by Saroglu, a full-scale, full-blown religion has all these 4 dimensions, he says: belief, bonding, behaving, and belonging. When one or more dimension is lacking, then you have something other than religion. For example, spiritual belief systems might not have a moral dimension, but still they provide some sort of belonging to the community, bonding, belief, etc., etc. So he categorizes different belief systems in terms of the presence or absence of each of these dimensions. That's the theoretical article. In 2020, he and a group of researchers published, I think in the same journal, a more empirical study of the existence, presence, or absence of different aspects of religion and how they contribute to different kinds of social needs. And about the ecological aspect of religion, yes, there is there was an anthropological study in the American journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Botero and Franz, and they emphasized how religions contribute to the solution of ecological problems, both historically and today. And this is why religions are especially adaptive, efficient, they claim. So the ecology dimension cannot be ignored, as you say.
I believe it was Turchin was the name, where there's a connection between military behavior and cooperation, which makes
Right.
sense. But from the adaptationist point of view, I think this is important because what it implies is that multi-level selection is going on. In other words, reduction of conflict within groups, but competition between groups,
Right.
which I could throw out a hypothesis that part of modern problems is the fact that religions are no longer exclusive to in-groups and become so big that they're multi-religious, and so therefore there's greater problems with cooperation. Just as hypothesis.
Okay. I think Norenzayan was making the same point at the end of his, where is that? Big Goals book, How Religion Transformed Cooperation and Conflict. Religion produces both cooperation and conflict. And his suggestion at the end of the book is that with modern state-level societies, we may no longer need religion to maintain a cooperative, harmonious society, which may or may not be true. So in all of this work, there is always the implication that religion on the whole is a good thing, which may or may not be the case.
Okay, so the adaptationists say that religion solves the free rider problem in a way.
Yes.
But most of the organized religions are based on forgiving and acceptance, which free riders can exploit and even take advantage more than they started. Can't they?
Well, I really don't know how to answer this question. Punitiveness may go too far, where forgivingness may also go too far. That's all I can say.
Hell is stronger than heaven.
But his point is that many, you know the term axial age religions? Axial age religions usually emphasize forgiving, being a generous person, being a high-minded person, instead of directly punishing every transgression. So the question is, if the axial age religions are so forgiving, how can they maintain cooperation? But somehow they have, but I'm not sure about the details.
I feel like the main focus is on the group level. I feel like the main focus is on the group level selection when we talk about cooperation and stuff like that. But from an individual perspective, to my knowledge, on average, people who are religious are less depressed.
Less depressed, right?
Yeah, and stuff like that. So the palliative function of religion, you know, to mention that, couldn't it be evolved for those purposes rather than cooperating within group?
Yes, in the psychology of religion literature, Religion and mental health. Religious people usually suffer less from mental health problems. Is this directly relevant? Could this be directly relevant to the evolutionary function of religion? It might be. But usually when people talk about why religion evolved, they rarely mention its mental health benefits. But maybe that's a foresight. Maybe that's something that needs to be corrected. Yes.
Okay, so very fascinating. I just find it hard to frame the question in terms of adaptation versus byproduct, because I was thinking that even if at some point one can show that religion causally increases cooperation, large-scale cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
this does not imply that religion evolved to
Right,
fulfill
right.
that property. It's possible that there were already some precursor of religion that were then shaped to fulfill that property.
Right.
And I guess that these precursors come from our awareness of mortality. So religious beliefs are just a coping mechanism to avoid the terror of the fact that life is going to end.
Okay, but again, that's I agree. Religion, religious belief, religious practice maybe contributes to mental well-being. Does that increase your reproductive success, inclusive fitness? That's the evolutionary question we are interested in.
Still, it's a byproduct. It's difficult.
Okay, I'll just repeat one point you made because it's important. The point is that today, religion, being religious or being reminded of religious ideas may promote cooperation. This does not necessarily mean that in evolutionary history, religion was selected because it increased cooperation. One is a claim about proximate mechanisms. The other one is a claim about ultimate mechanisms. So that distinction is important to make.
So we talk about whether religion is religion is adaptation or byproduct. But why do we talk about they are like mutually exclusive?
Which two things are mutually exclusive?
Adaptation side of religion and byproduct side of religion. They could be both right together. And just think like that. Hyperagency detection, this idea is coming from a byproduct side, and there could also be some positive adaptive advantages of religious beliefs.
Okay.
So they are not mutually exclusive, I think.
Right, you're right. So this is actually one of the points that Sosis was making in the article I mentioned. So he considers this as a possibility. He doesn't really believe it, but let's assume that religion is a byproduct of a more fundamental thinking dispositions, hypersensitive agency detection device, teleological thinking, etc., etc. So religious belief was not selected itself, but rather it is the byproduct of other fundamental thinking dispositions. Let's assume this is true. But still, once people start producing religious beliefs, religious behaviors, etc., religious communities, this can become adaptive by itself, and the resultant behaviors, practices, etc., could be selected. So religion could start as a byproduct, but turn into an adaptation because of its effects on inclusive fitness. That's possible, and that's one of the points Sosis is making about misunderstandings of the adaptationist position. So you're right. İlayda Hanım.